Hello, everybody. Hi. And welcome to the panel on the theories. I don't know the exact one, sorry, but theoretical innovations about that happened in the Saturday School. And I am actually really, really excited to be moderating the panel as well as speaking because I just think the theories that we come up with in Saturday School and the things that kind of go on and the things that we talk about and discuss are something that need to be at the forefront of just us as a people. You know, the things that we talk about, the things that we discuss are things that we come together and flesh out and argue our ways through, get into it with each other, and have coffee later to debrief on what had just happened. So before I begin, I do want to just just talk about how great Saturday School is really short, because I know that's kind of what the whole conference is actually about, but just my own personal experience before I go into the theories and how that affects me in my individual life. But I think why Saturday School is really important and why I'm so drawn to it, and the reason I feel so compelled to do all of the things that I do for Saturday School and that show up, at 10 o'clock, even though it's at 9:30, but making it there every Saturday, kind of committing myself, work, takes a second priority to Saturday School. All my managers know that Saturdays you can't catch me until 2 o'clock, assuming that's when we end. And I think that these type of things are what I should be feeling for school and for learning. So, I've always been good at school. I've always excelled in English and all of these different departments that school kind of puts you into. But I just never felt challenged. I never felt like, the English language, these were just too easy things. Like, I didn't even really have to learn. I didn't really care. I didn't even have to really read the books that my professors and all these things were giving me, because it was just skimming through it real quick, get to the big parts, and it's almost like, thinking about it now, it's almost like I was playing the game. Like, I just gave my professors exactly what they needed, just the right amount, and they were fine with it. Oh my God, you were great. I was like, I spent 10 minutes on doing this type of stuff. And it's not something I want to be proud of doing, right? But when I got to Saturday School, when I went my first time, when I, met Doc and the Black Radical Tradition Conference and all of these different things kind of pushed me to think better, to match my experience with what I'm learning, I think it really changed me really for the better, and it helped me interrogate and not be afraid to interrogate the things that happen in my life, and not to fear what is being told to me and questioning what has been told to me, because as a kid I've always been the questioner, but growing up religious and in the society that we live in now, it's very tough to ask questions and get answers. But at Saturday School, which is something that I love, that I just feel any question that I ever have, I've had these same questions about white supremacy, I've had these same questions about just my life as a person, and the only place I've ever found some type of answer has been at Saturday School. So I just want everyone to just be able to know how much it means to me as I'm speaking about it today, and just helping organize this thing. So there's that. Thank you. So the panelists, before I speak, I guess I'll just introduce them so everyone can know who they are. We have Nandika, who's a Penn student and really kind of new to the Saturday School, but has quickly become such a family member and a part of it that she feels like she's been here forever, and always giving in her very intellectual thoughts on the matters and her perspective, and just the dedication she has helping these conferences, and helping the theories that we learn, and giving context to her own experience with that kind of gives us a very unique perspective that I always love when she comes in. So then there's also Dr. Monteiro, which we all know, Tony Monteiro, facilitator, I guess you want to call him, of Saturday School, but also someone who's pushed all of us and pushed me specifically to think and to not just embrace my ideas, but also to be strong in them, to not doubt myself, to not doubt the conclusions that I come to not doubt where I'm going to be moving forward, that the answer can always be found collectively, is what Doc, I feel, always embodies when he comes into Saturday School prepared to help us learn. But also what I love and appreciate about him is that he opens the floor up, and he learns from us, which is something you really don't always see, especially in these academic spaces where people don't allow you to, the professor is the authority. And here and with Doc and, listening to him, just know that the things that he says and the things that he also conceptualizes comes from the people and comes from his students as well, which I think is very valuable. Then we have Meghna, my favorite person ever, who is, a hardcore organizer. She's in these spaces, and she's always the one bringing up how are we going to collectively bring people who aren't as conscious or aren't as politicized or who aren't as aware of the spaces in which we are in. How are we going to get them to come to Saturday School and understand, and how are we going to break down patriarchy, white supremacy, in these things. So these are really great people to be learning from and to be hearing about the theories that we come up with at Saturday School, because a lot of the time, they're at the forefront of asking those really tough questions that make us kind of flesh all this stuff out. So there's that. And I'm Elias Gonzalez. I haven't been at Saturday School as long, but time doesn't even matter. Because once I got there, I was propelled into the thought process, the theory, the energy that we all kind of embodied when we were there. And when we speak about the theories that happen at Saturday School, the reason that I'm so just so excited all of the time, every Saturday, I'm always so excited to go, because it's a new process of learning and something new is always going to be discovered. And I guess I should start talking about what those things are. So when we think about white supremacy and when we think about our identities and our lives as politicized people, whether we're black or whether we're East Asian, Southeast Asian, or whether we're men or whether we're women, or whether we're transgender men or transgender women, or while we're non-binary, or while we're queer, and all of these different aspects that come into our everyday lives that politicize us, that make us interact with the world in such a different way than white people or the white supremacist thought process allows you to do. I think we don't ever stop and interrogate what white supremacy is and how it affects our lives. We kind of don't think about the inner workings and what that really means for everybody and for every single person, because we spend a lot of our time trying to survive, and that's totally a valid thing that happens. We're trying to eat, we're trying to sleep, you know what I mean? We're trying to operate throughout this world as high morally as we possibly can or conceive to think so. And what we learn at Saturday School and what we learn through James Baldwin and through Du Bois are this idea of two worlds, right? That there's the white world and then there's the black world, if you want to, reduce it that simplistic, right? But the whole idea is that white people and what we've come to, or white supremacy, right? What is white supremacy? It's this indoctrination that kind of makes you recreate your reality through these falsehoods, through these lies that you keep telling yourself, or that you want to be true so bad because you don't want to face the tragedy of life, which is that we all end up dying, that we don't live forever. And it's about and while us as people of color and us as an oppressed group understand that, death is imminent, death is right there, but we don't fear death because death is staring at our faces every single day through police brutality, through, even just depression, through, all of these mental illnesses that kind of come up out of the situations that we are in, or these mindsets that we get ourselves into. White supremacy kind of makes you want to lie to yourself, wants you to lie to other people to create these forms that are true, whether they are or are not. And what we learned in Saturday School about white supremacy, and what James Baldwin, at the end of the day, when I started reading what he's talking about, is not to be so mean to the product of these things. It's understanding where the systems come from and how we can beat these systems. Why do white people create their own realities? Why is it that they're the ones, not being able to see the humanity or the lack of humanity in shooting someone in the face right in front of you when someone's begging for their lives, or seeing how, they're the material necessity that we need to live and to eat in your own backyards, that they just don't see it. And instead of, what identity politics or some nationalist ideas make you think is that that's just things how they are. People are just how they are. And that never sat well with me. I never could just think, this is not, where did this come from? I always like to investigate and ask why, and ask who made this up? Who is telling us that this is real? Who is telling us that this is the right thing to think or the right thing to do? And through Saturday school, we learn, and through Baldwin, really, and through Du Bois, of course, that these are like the realities that we're trying. That's why it's so hard to become white, because it's an impossible thing. It's not real. You know what I mean? It's living in a fantasy. It's thinking that you're the most beautiful creatures in the world, and that but in order to be that, everyone else has to be lower. Everyone has to be less. And instead of thinking of the intercivilizational unity that Doc talks about, where it's understanding people's cultures and understanding and respecting them and wanting to learn them, you know, because through my own life experience, before Saturday school in the AFAM department, like Kashara had spoken earlier, you didn't feel that sense of intercivilizational unity. You know, it was just black people and African American life, and not that that isn't something to investigate into, but the black lifestyle and the blackness, as even Baldwin put, as I just finished the No Name on the Street, was that he just didn't know, the weight wasn't about wanting to be white, he just didn't know what it meant to be black. And he didn't know how he was supposed to survive this if he didn't even know what it meant, until he realized, you know, that it's having to struggle, but to struggle to do better, to be, to not let white supremacy take him down, right? And that's by being an honest man, right, which is Baldwin, who he always wanted to do his entire life, was to be honest, to be straightforward, to be true to himself no matter what, to be true to his people no matter what. And Saturday school really shed light on how these type of systems of white supremacy operate. So in identity politics, it's not, white supremacy isn't white is better, black is worse. It's because I'm this identity, I have more authority, I'm better, I'm more intelligent in this way because I'm more oppressed, or because I'm more this or more that. Instead of thinking of it as a people, we come to this collective. This truth is not individual. Truth is collective. If Kashara or Doc or Meghna have a certain experience and there's a similar thread, our individual, ideas, yes, they exist, but together, what do they create instead of just what they do, So I hope I'm making some type of sense, because it is a very complicated thing. But with the different worlds and understanding what, at the end of the day, I learned at Saturday school with this whole idea of what white supremacy, how it pops up, is that I guess it's really just to be true to yourself and to be true to who you are, and to be true to the people. It's living in truth, right? And whatever that means, and that means investigating it, that means not being afraid of it, right? And what we've learned, and what we learned through this word tragedy, right? Baldwin uses it sometimes. And when we had a little Shakespeare get together, when Divya talked to us about how The Tempest relates contemporary to, we did it at Asaze's house. And we really dictated what the word tragedy was. What did that mean? And we found out that, or what we came to conclusion to, was that tragedy means when you know death is imminent, just like Hugh in Revolutionary Suicide knows, and he talks about how death is going to happen regardless of, that's the only truth that we know. It's about still trying to aspire to do better, not trying to escape it, not trying to do the white supremacist idea of ignoring it as the problem goes away and creating something new through television, which is something that I've, through Saturday school, investigated and thought how TV kind of recreates a reality that, this is what white people or whiteness wants to create, wants to give you this impression of people not caring about money and just having these really extravagant, adventures and these things that they don't really have to sit down and interrogate their everyday life of who they are and what they're bringing to the world, and how we have to all just be heroic in the own way, in our own sense. So heroic meaning, heroic, God, I can't even say it, but heroic being, seeing in the face of confrontation and being above it, speaking on that, on when move isn't being mentioned in the history of Philadelphia, being that person to speak up, or talking about how there are black people in these places that white people like to not talk about. It's about, regardless of knowing that death is imminent, that death is right there, we're not scared of death. And as black people and as a people of color and as an oppressed group, we're not afraid of death. And whiteness makes you afraid of death because what are you then after that? Whereas we know that it's the thought that matters. It's, the revolutionary can die, but the revolutionary thought doesn't never die. Huey still, his thoughts and his ideas and what he's thinking and how he's thinking is still alive with us today. And it's because he didn't think about his lifespan as what really mattered. It was interesting reading his book and then kind of discussing it and talking about it here, how, he's not afraid of death, and he's just, how can I bring thought? How can I bring revolution? How can I just change people's opinions? And how do I do that, while attending to their material needs? And I think Saturday school, when we think about it and when we think about the theories that we come up with, which is just more than just what white supremacy is, but who are we as people? Who are we as people? As a civilization that has multiple civilizations inside of it, how do we come to a new truth that doesn't rely on the oppression of others, that it doesn't erase queer people, which is, my number one thing, that we're just constantly erased from history. Gay men, gay women are just constantly just seen as just an oddity in these spaces, and are stripped away from their humanity and taken into white queer spaces and only being seen as queer, not, you know what I mean? There's this whole dichotomy of as me as a politicized entity, right? Saturday school really puts you in the sense that this experience matters, but it doesn't define you. You know what I mean? I'm not defined by these things. And while I want to be defined by these things in certain spaces, what Saturday school taught me and what it shied away from was putting that identity onto me until I brought it up, until I was like, and white supremacy, what I've learned, puts you on these labels, puts you on these tags. And I think those are the theories that we're coming up with, that white supremacy is just like a thought process. It's not about at the end of the day, it's not about the skin necessarily, but it's about the idea and the thoughts and the minds. And that's why, when Kashara is talking about, her ideas being attacked and how she never thought that was possible, I never thought my ideas could grow into bigger ideas, into better ideas, into theories, into actuality, into reality, because, this wasn't what I was taught to do in regular school. I wasn't taught to take myself, put myself in the position, use my perspective, use what I know, use my history, and use what's around me and the people who are around me to come to this conclusion. I wasn't taught that, and I wasn't challenged to do that, and I wasn't put in a position where I was groomed, by so many revolutionaries, by so many comrades, you know what I mean? Like all of these people who we go to Saturday school with, we always hang out after, we're doing, you know what I mean? It's more than just us coming to class together, which is something that I'm so used to in college and all of these different things. And I feel like that's a thought process. That's how you thought the classroom was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a bunch of strangers in a room learning from one authority about your history, versus learning our history together. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Nandika and be moderating the panel.
Why we need knowledge production outside of the universities. And that's because every revolutionary movement throughout history has come from new ideas and new logics to understand the world. These new logics always combine the social and material conditions of their present moment with methods from past revolutionary theories to a new understanding that allows them to change the world. At the Free School, we have studied the theories of Karl Marx and the method of dialectics that attempts to explain society. Before Lenin, Marx's theory predicted that industrial workers would be the agents of change and that revolution would begin in the most industrial nations of Western Europe. Conditions that were decidedly absent from Russia in the early 20th century. However, Lenin believed in the actuality of the revolution. He took on the revolutionary task of studying the material and social conditions of Russian society. Through his study, he was able to build on Marx's theory and recognize that there were two distinct forces with revolutionary potential in Russian society. the workers and the poor peasants. It was this recognition which led to the possibility of an alliance between the workers and poor peasants, and eventually what led to the Russian Revolution. Lenin's theoretical work is of even greater importance in that it shows a direction for the liberation of much of the Third World, a Third World that is agrarian. Following the example of Lenin and other revolutionaries, the Saturday Free School studies the conditions of American society along with its history. We recognize the power of past theories but are not constrained by them, for we believe that in this particular moment, we can only understand the world with new thought that comes from a study of history and the present. We reject the dogmatic application of past theory to practice today because it cannot lead to the building of revolutionary movements and action. The work of accurately understanding American capitalist society has been begun already by W.E.B. Du Bois. His book, Black Reconstruction, starts with 3 chapters titled The Black Worker, The White Worker, and The Planter. Du Bois is drawing our attention to the fact that the working class in this country has always been divided along the color line. His study of history shows us that racial oppression has had a concentrating effect on the black masses. The black worker has always been the ultimate exploited and has never had the option of aspiring to white capital. The possibility of becoming one day a part of the capitalist class in order to exploit other laborers, either directly or by alliance, was never possible. In Baldwin's words, the American Negro has had the advantage of never having believed the collection of myths to which white Americans cling. Even the capitalist groups that developed from the black masses in Charleston and New Orleans were pushed back into the masses by racial prejudice. The idea of a black person with power was too dangerous and too much of a threat to the structures of white supremacy and capital. So the black community and its alignments have always been defined by the color line as much as class. On the other hand, the construction of whiteness has always stood in the way of white workers, even considering an alliance with black workers. In the days of slavery, poor whites aligned with planters in hopes that they too could one day amass enough wealth to be economically independent. In industry, the white worker has aspired to become part of the capitalist class, to have the power to one day exploit labor for his own personal gain. Even during the powerful union movements, the early union movements of the 1840s, the unions refused to align with the abolitionists. The white workers saw the free black man as competition more than other white workers, and whiteness did not allow them to see that enslaved black masses were even more formidable competition for their wages than free black masses. In other words, whiteness has stood as a barrier to unified class struggle throughout American history. It is not a mere complication to class structure, but it has changed it fundamentally. Race in America is over-determining in nature. So, to understand and explain the class struggle in America, the dialectic between workers and capitalists is insufficient. Instead, we'll go to Du Bois in his concept of the black worker, the white worker, and the capitalist. We need a different logic structure, a dialectic through triads, or a dialectic in threes. We have 3 classes in society, not 2. The capitalists at the top, the white workers, and the black workers. The struggle between the white worker and the capitalist is one of material struggle. The capitalist needs the white worker's labor, and the white worker needs the capitalist because he owns the means of production, the factories. But each works for their own material interest, which is against the other. Thus, the dialectic struggle. The struggle between the white worker and the black worker is defined by whiteness. To understand this, we go to James Baldwin. He says, the Negro came to the white man for a roof, or for $5, or for a letter to the judge. The white man came to the Negro for love. In other words, the white world in this country needs the black world for their own humanity. Black people need from the white world just one thing, power. The third side, the antagonism between the black worker and the capitalist, is defined both by material struggle as well as the struggle over whiteness. This doubly intense antagonism is why the black masses have never aligned with capital. In traditional Marxist thought, the class struggle works through dialectics. You have capitalists and workers who both need each other but are against each other, the thesis and the antithesis. Through their struggle, a synthesis is born, social transformation, and socialism. Race fundamentally changes this conception. In one way, the black masses reduce the tension between the white workers and the capitalists. The white worker is able to say, at least I'm better off than a black person. On the other hand, due to its exclusion from power, the black community forms a block of great revolutionary potential with the ability to destabilize the entire system. The question then arises, when you have dialectics through triads, how does one get synthesis? In Russia, the contradiction between the workers and the peasants was resolved to form an alliance that could struggle against the rulers in unity. It required the redistribution of land. In some ways, the analogous task ahead of us is much more difficult. It requires the destruction of whiteness among the white poor. Hence, in this respect, the white working class remains for revolutionary movement here a focal point. Will they be able to confront their own whiteness to see the humanity of the black worker? Will there be a principled unity against the corporate class? All of this remains to be seen, but I'd like to say something about the election at this point. In our discussions at the Saturday Free School, we have come to the conclusion that this election and the poor vote for Trump can be seen as a crisis of whiteness. The white worker is finally protesting their miserable conditions. In a way, they are saying, do not reduce us to the black man. For the black masses have been facing these material conditions for much longer and with consistency. Among the white poor, unemployment, disease, and mental health problems continue to devastate. The destruction of white workers' material conditions, starting with deindustrialization, has led to a crisis of his alliance with the capitalists, on whom he has so far depended to protect his interests. This is a very significant election. Now you may say that this is all well and good, but where do the immigrants come into this triad? This is a very important question, and one that me and my comrades have asked ourselves over and over again. When non-white immigrants arrive in this country, in many ways they are separated from parts of their civilization almost with some violence. In particular, their ways of establishing human relationships is at odds with the white world. Sometimes as a result, they end up interacting minimally with the outside world, staying within their community of immigrants. However, I want to talk about the youth. The youth that grows up here grows up American, in contact with other communities. How do they relate to the world? There is a strong economic and material pressure to align with whiteness, to adopt the social relations that white people have. Fitting into American society, making a living often means assimilation into whiteness. But assimilation necessarily means that you reject your civilization, that you reject your community. The people you come from are deemed as problematic. You are told to go find your identity, which is another way of saying, find your place in the individualistic white world. Whiteness erases your civilization. In such a scenario, the black world, as Du Bois says, a world within a world, provides a civilizational anchor. Aligning with the black world allows us to go back to our civilizations, to go back to our communities. I would even go a step further and say that this alignment allows the synthesis of a new culture and civilization that comes from, but is different from the civilizations our communities have immigrated from. The practice of South Asian American civilization is not the same as the practice of civilization in South Asia. It is decidedly American, and I think that the civilizational anchor of the black world is part of what creates this. I will end with a quote from Du Bois. He says, "Out of the exploitation of the dark proletariat comes the surplus value filched from human beasts, which in cultured lands the machine has harnessed power, veil, and conceal. The emancipation of man and the emancipation of labor is the freeing of that basic majority of workers who are yellow, brown, and black." Thank you.
I don't actually know if I can follow that. I feel really privileged to call Nandita my comrade, who's just spoken with such theoretical sophistication and brilliance and courage and ferocity. So I just want to thank you again. Thank you, Nandita. I love you. So I want to speak a little bit more about what Nandita already started to talk about, which is intercivilizational unity. And if anyone comes to the free school, you will notice there is a strong contingent of South Asians. This may seem strange, as Nandita was saying, in the context of Desi black relations, because despite the fact that we also have brown and black skin, sometimes we're even blacker than black people in America, many Desis are becoming white. As Nandita already went into, our material reality as immigrants in America means we must distance ourselves from our communities and black people to make it in America. In the university, we are taught that our communities and nations are problematic and patriarchal, and we learn to treat working people as objects of study and even loathing, who need to be educated by we enlightened intellectuals. As one of our black friends said, we came here as slaves and had our culture stolen from us. You come here willingly and willingly give up your culture to fit in with white people. We have learned in the free school that it is not just a culture or even a national identity we are giving up to fit into whiteness by making it in the market or in the university. It is a civilization. A civilization is the sum of millennia of human history. Rather than belonging to the elite few, it is the common heritage of humanity. Rather than being dead in the history books, it is being constantly remade as the people struggle for their liberation. Jazz comes out of Black American civilization. Buddhism is a liberation movement of Hindu civilization against meaningless ritual and the caste system. Islam is a source of revolutionary inspiration for martyrs like Hussein and Al-Hallaj, who stood up against tyranny by those who call themselves Muslim. And in the song that I sang earlier, there is a line, Utega anal haq ka nara, and that was the cry that he raised that got him beheaded, but he was saying, we are the creatures of God, and so the earth belongs to us, and we will be the ones to rule the earth someday. At the Saturday Free School, we are bound together by intercivilizational unity. What this means in practice is that we stand together as Black people, African people, South Asian people, Southeast Asian people, Latino people, Indigenous people, and white people in principled unity for a world in which all people can be human beings. Huey Newton talked about revolutionary intercommunalism. He pointed out that in a globalized world, the 1% has expanded to take over governments and cultures of other countries, which he called reactionary intercommunalism. People are united as a global community of consumers, a community of individuals looking out for themselves. People are united in oppression by the rule of the American police force at home and abroad. We see, this is from his speech at Boston University. We see very little difference in what happens to a community here in North America and what happens to a community in Vietnam. We see very little difference in what happens, even culturally, to a Chinese community in San Francisco and a Chinese community in Hong Kong. We see very little difference in what happens to a Black community in Harlem and a Black community in South America, a Black community in Angola and one in Mozambique. The Black Panther Party was not against the connection of communities. They were against the concentration of power into the hands of the 1%. Today, imperialism looks blacker and browner than ever, but it continues to enforce a white power structure that dehumanizes and dispossessed darker people to make way for capitalist loot. As revolutionaries, it is our task to bring power back to these communities. We do this by rejecting whiteness and capitalism and its chokehold over our civilizations. We take our cue from the great W.E.B. Du Bois, who counted many South Asian intellectuals and revolutionaries as his friends. He wrote The Dark Princess in 1928, which is a book about a talented young Black man who struggles to stay true to himself and fight against the white world for a world in which he can be human. It is also about an Indian princess who struggles to liberate her people from British imperialism. Matthew goes to Berlin to escape from American racism, and that's where he meets the princess. She is part of a group of leaders of the darker nations who are trying to free themselves from white rule. The princess awakens Matthew to the worldwide movement against the imperialism. Matthew, by being African American and representing a world within a world built by the sons of slaves and workers, awakens the princess to the possibilities of world proletarian revolution. This is something that she says. Before I saw you, I, with most of the others, except the Chinese, had thought of our goal as a substitution of the rule of dark men in the world for the rule of white, because the colored peoples were the noblest and best bred. But you said, that the masses of men of all races might be the best of men, simply imprisoned by poverty and ignorance. I began to feel that my dream of the world based on the domination of an ancient royal race and blood might not be all right, but that as the Lord Buddha said, and as we do not yet understand, humanity itself was royal. Matthew and the princess fall deeply in love with each other as comrades who declass themselves. Matthew leaves his work as a doctor and works as a Pullman car porter and digger alongside humble black, white, and yellow workers. Black European and yellow workers. They had not yet become white. Kautilya leaves her royal position behind and works as a servant, a waitress, a tobacco hand, and a box maker. She becomes a union organizer and throws herself into the labor movement. Matthew overcomes the cynicism and nihilism of the black misleadership class, and Kautilya overcomes the seduction of the colonial gaze. They literally give birth to a new world founded upon the freedom of darker peoples and all people to be human. When we root ourselves in our civilization in principled unity with black people, we stand against capitalism, imperialism, and whiteness, and draw on the best of our traditions, like respect for elders, abundance of food, deep love for the people, value for community, and we bring them into a revolutionary program of peace, freedom from hunger, quality education, free healthcare, and dignified jobs for all. We cannot topple down the system that denies our people a dignified life without being in principled unity with black struggle. We cannot reach our people except from a place of love for who we are and the liberatory histories that made us. Intercivilizational unity helps us solve many problems we face when we come together to build unity, even among South Asians. I know we all look brown, but we are definitely not the same. With intercivilizational theory, we can work across differences and build principal unity on the basis of people's material needs. For example, I work with a group of young South Asians, and we're working to build a worker center among the working class South Asian community in Upper Darby so we can serve the people and raise people's consciousness. So our cadre of organizers includes Bangladeshis, Indians, and Pakistanis. Having betrayed the masses in the anti-colonial struggle, the elites of each of these nations have been at war with each other over the people's wealth. They use bigotry and demagoguery to maintain their domination in cahoots with imperialism and finance capital. Still, the people share thousands of years of culture and history across national borders. That's why we call each other Desi, which comes from the word Desh, which means of our own country. Each of these countries also has different civilizations within themselves. Pakistan is made up of Punjabis, Pashtuns, Sindhis, Saraikis, Muhajirs, Baloches, and others. In India, people speak at least 28 official languages, each with its own culture and food, including Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, and on and on. Bangladeshi speak 6 different dialects of Bengali, and Bappi was telling me how, Bengali from Chittagong and Bengali from Dhaka are totally different. These 3 countries have many different religions of them, which in turn have different sects and local variations. When we go back to our civilizations rather than our nation states, the differences among us are a source of constant learning and appreciation rather than chauvinism. We welcome any and all traditions as our own that bring us closer to winning a world free from hunger, poverty, exploitation, and discrimination. We go from our divisions, which are often the cause for violence and hatred when capitalism forces us to compete for resources, to the commonality of our material human needs, which is why I'm Indian, but Faiz's ghazal resonates with me more than Sare Jahan Se Acha. We are rooted in the Sikh tradition of langar, which feeds everybody regardless of social position and which was made to break caste and gender divisions between people. We are rooted in the community of Ummah, which sees all Muslims, regardless of social division, as part of a universal human fraternity. We are rooted in jihad, or righteous struggle against our egos and for a more just world. We are rooted in the liberation movement of Sri Narayan Guru against patriarchal caste oppression. We believe in the truth of the Atma, that we are all part of the same great soul, and that all paths lead to the same God. Finally, intercivilizational unity means we embrace our civilizational commonalities with Black people and African people. Geniuses like John Coltrane and Alice Coltrane created music that touches the divine through the fusion of jazz and Hindustani music. Princess Kautilya traces the dark goddess Kali, who's the goddess of destruction, to Africa. Oh, Matthew, you have a wonderful mother. Have you seen her hands? Have you seen the gnarled and knotted glory of her hands? And then slowly, with wide eyes, your mother is Kali, the black one, wife of Shiva, mother of the world. The journey to intercivilizational unity is a journey into our past, a journey into our future, and a journey into ourselves. Growing up, I often felt torn between the brown world and the white world. Now I understand I belong with the black world, which is to say I belong with humanity.
I'm in a very unenviable position. Wow, how do you follow such brilliance? But let me just begin by saying that I don't say anything new to you all by saying that we are in a unique moment, a moment of singularity. Singularity is a concept used in the natural sciences. In mathematics, it refers to a point at which a given object is not defined by its expected behavior. In political and economic and social terms, we have reached that moment where social relations no longer behave in predictable or well-behaved manners. We are in a moment of the unexpected and the unforeseen, which makes this a moment of both danger and possibility. This is a moment of socioeconomic breakdown, of systemic collapse of the existing world order, of an existential crisis of the neoliberal, by which I mean the end-stage capitalist order. New contradictions have appeared, new divisions, new antagonisms, and again, new possibilities. In such moments, things do not behave as we expect them to, or as theory has predicted. And I say all of this to say that the death of revolutionary movements comes on the shield of dogmatism and looking backward rather than forward. And at such a moment, it is not the past glories of revolutionary movements that should be our lodestar, our guiding light, but it is our ability to scientifically understand and analyze this moment and these contradictions as we move forward. Dogmatism, to briefly define it, is the transformation of scientific theory into a belief system or something that borders on faith and religion. In a world of crisis, revolutionary movements need science and revolutionary theory, not dogmatism. Now, I say this because I want to talk about what we call the white supremacist social system. It is usually thought that the system is capitalist and white supremacy and whiteness are derivatives of it. I would like to propose that the system has evolved to what we have at this stage as a white supremacist social system within which capitalist economic relationships exist. Hence, it is not only conceivable, but history is witness to the fact that things happen this way, that capitalist economic relations in many countries have been overthrown but the system of white supremacy persists. And the contradiction between new economic relationships and the social system of white supremacy threatens the new economic system itself, destabilizes it. For example, the collapse of socialism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe was followed by, as it inevitably would have to be followed by, a reappearance of the worst forms of white supremacy and a predisposition among broad parts of the population to identify as white rather than German, Russian, Polish, etc. And the breakup of the Soviet Union saw the separation of the white republics, in particular Russia, the Ukraine, and Belarus, they're uniting and separating from the non-white republics of the former Soviet Union. Similarly, in many countries of South America, we see a similar phenomenon, a move towards revolutionary change, but at the same time, a holding back of this progressive movement by the unwillingness of broad parts of the population and leadership of revolutionary movements to abandon white supremacy and whiteness as an identity, which means white privilege, and to say that ultimately the new economic relations will solve the questions of white supremacy and whiteness itself. My point is it never does. Now, as my colleagues have said, the theoretical and ideological foundations for the thinking that I'm proposing, and I think which they are proposing, is Du Bois and Baldwin. First of all, Du Bois's notion of the color line. The color line not only affects the oppressed, in other words, those behind the color line, those oppressed by race, but in Du Boisian terms affects the entire system. Du Bois indicated in Black Reconstruction in America that the color line creates distinct features of class formation and the class struggle itself. In fact, Du Bois points out that several of the best followers of Karl Marx in Germany, when they immigrated to the United States, having been completely convinced of Karl Marx's theory of the class struggle, when they immigrate to the United States, say that the class struggle means separating white workers and their interests from the interest of the enslaved Africans. In many ways, we see this in the 21st century. White radicals and leftists who give lip service to racism and black oppression, but then in practical and theoretical terms assert that it is the class struggle which will resolve the question of white supremacy, whiteness, and the oppression of black folk. This is a huge mistake. But it is a mistake on other grounds than the obvious. And the other grounds, I think, have to do with the historical evolution of the system. I would suggest that you read an essay that I wrote called Why James Arthur Baldwin Still Matters, where I talk about this, and I don't want to read it, I'll just tell you what I'm trying to get at. You know, Lenin saw that the capitalist system, by the end of the 1800s, had evolved into a system of imperialism. It had become global, banks were in charge, and the old laws of capitalist development no longer applied in the era of what he called imperialism. I would like to suggest that the system of imperialism, especially after World War II and the victory of the United States was the principal victor of World War II, that the system morphed from a system of what Lenin called imperialism to a system of what I glean from the writings of Du Bois and Baldwin to a white supremacist system. In other words, to abort the class struggle between white capitalists and white workers, a new system which guaranteed not only the reproduction of capital, but the reproduction of whiteness and white privilege, and hence the stabilization of the global system, now a system of white supremacy, is predicated upon guaranteeing to white people and white workers the possibility of always rising up the structures of capitalism materially, psychologically, and spiritually. In order for the global system to be stabilized, it must morph into a white supremacist social system. The investment in white supremacy and whiteness is as significant as the investment in capital. People will ask, for example, is the war in Syria based upon the fact that Syria has oil? Well, I don't know that Syria has a great deal of oil, and I don't know at this point if the world really needs Syria's oil, if it has any. But one thing is certain, that the war in Syria is a war of Western or white hegemony over a non-Western and non-white nation. The Palestinian struggle. I don't think we can fully understand the oppression of the Palestinian struggle by Western white people who ethnically identify themselves as Jewish. But I think the important and significant identity is as Western white people. It is almost an irrational system of apartheid with very little significant economic benefit. But what does it achieve? Its greatest achievement is the establishment of white hegemony over non-white people. The rational thing, of course, would be for Israel to support a two-state solution. Obviously, the Palestinian state would be militarily and economically, politically and otherwise subordinate to the more powerful, Western-aligned Israeli state. But it does not budge. The question is, what is the interest? What is the investment of Israel in maintaining the oppression of the Palestinian people? And I think it is white supremacy, white hegemony. But in investing in that, it evolves, the situation evolves into a system of social, political, economic, and other relationships, which I will call the white supremacist social system. Lastly, the highest development of this white supremacist social system is the system that exists in the United States. Baldwin was absolutely right. Unless whiteness and the white supremacist system is brought down, there can never be a revolution in the United States. It is not the opposite. Such an assertion, and this is all over Baldwin, this is all over Du Bois, and if you extend the logic of their thinking out, you arrive at the conclusion of three principles. One, the centrality of the struggle for black liberation to the liberation of the working class and all other oppressed groups in the United States. The second one that goes along with that is the principle of non-equivalency. There is no equivalent historically and strategic force in the United States to the black proletariat and the black struggle. And the third point is that if there is to be unity, it must be principled unity predicated upon the two previously stated principles. The concept of the class struggle that emerged from the European situation, even in the form of the notion of imperialism and Lenin's concept of workers and peasants, and even workers, peasants, and oppressed nations and nationality. As advanced as that is for its time, does not acknowledge the new formative system that we're now confronted with, that I will call a white supremacist social system, which must be undermined, demolished, and brought down if there is to be a significant move away from capitalism and towards a new social order. Thank you very much.
I just want to thank the panelists once again for speaking so beautifully and being comrades in the struggle. It's very inspiring to see them, really think these things through and have such great insight, and knowing that, they're my comrades and things. So moving on, we're gonna open it up to questions and comments from the audience. So if anyone has anything they want to say or ask the panelists, including myself, now's your chance. Anybody? Skipper.
Dr. Monteiro, considering the situation in Cuba in this period of history and the tremendous contradiction of the race question over the last 50 years of the socialist revolution, is it the issue of white nationalism within a Communist Party that has the antiquated ideology?
I'll just stand up here. That's okay, I'll just stand up here. Well, you know more about Cuba than I do. Pardon me?
What's the question?
He said he was asking about the race situation in Cuba and the ongoing existence of racism in Cuba, which kind of actualizes itself in white privilege or lighter skin privilege in Cuba. And I was saying to him that he knows Cuba better than I do. I would like to make a distinction between the existence of a white supremacist social system the likes of which we have here, and the existence of race prejudice like you have in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Bolivia, throughout South America and the Caribbean. I consider colonialism to be a variant of a white supremacist system. In the United States, the white supremacist social system creates everything in doubles. You know, like Du Bois said, the black people live in a world within a world. Another way of talking about that, as he would, is a nation within a nation, or a colonialized people within a nation like this. And it's obvious when you just move around this area that we're in right now. You go further towards Broad Street and towards Temple University. There's greater privilege and well-being and wealth. And as you go closer to Temple, it becomes whiter. As you move westward towards Strawberry Mansion, it becomes almost exclusively black, and so obviously impoverished. And this is but the most visual sign of this two-nation, one colonized, one colonizer. And we could go anywhere in this country. You could go to Baltimore, you could go to Chicago, the west side of Chicago versus the north side, and the Loop. And so wherever you go in the United States, you see these two life worlds. And I am calling this, although we could call these relations colonial relations, I am calling the system that produces and reproduces them a white supremacist social system. Now, I don't believe you have that in Cuba. However, as a former colony and neo-colony of the United States, race prejudice was a part of the system of control and management and preservation of the status of Cuba with the United States. Now, that's what Du Bois referred to as a color line within a color line. We see elements of it in Black America, where lighter skin, more European features are privileged over darker skin and more African features. All you have to do is go to the prisons of the United States. The darker you are, the greater the chances are that you are going to get a real bad punishment, and so on. And you know, we all know that. So black people will try to deflect from their African features or their African American folk ways in order not to get the harshest treatment of the white supremacist legal social system. In Cuba or in China, where there's race prejudice against Africans, in both of those, in Cuba and China, you don't have a white supremacist social system. Now, and I'm going to end here. As regards to Cuba or Venezuela, the deficiency is that they don't have a Du Bois or Baldwin who has theorized this. So in many ways, they're either operating off of improvisation of trying to fix it, or creating a myth that we're all one people and socialism has brought us all together, or they say we have to wait for our system to develop more economic stability before we can solve the question of racial prejudice and so on. And in every instance, the United States imperialists use the race question to destabilize revolutionary governments throughout the world. So I'm saying that we have the opportunity to make a contribution to our comrades and colleagues in arms wherever they fight by helping them to understand what is so apparent to us. I guess the last thing I say, and don't underestimate the profound resistance to what we're saying, because Black America has been diminished and demeaned in its contribution to revolutionary theory. But I think that Baldwin and Du Bois have gone places where the human intellect had not previously gone in exposing and helping us to understand the nature of the modern world and the modern world system. Talk too long, girl.
Any other questions, comments? Autumn, yes, come on up, Autumn. You too. Come up.
Yes.
I just had a quick question for Tony. When you were talking about the racism in Cuba, and you said that there's racial prejudice in Cuba, and what we have is a white social system here in the United States. And I'm just wondering if you could clarify that a little bit more. If you're talking about we have a white supremacist state apparatus and
Social system.
right, I don't know, I'm just wondering if you could expound on that a little bit more. Like, are you separating like state-sanctioned racism, white supremacy as we have it here in the United States, from Cuba, who presumably is not white supremacist in their state apparatus, but the society is? I was just wondering if you could clarify that a little. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would say so. That's what I'm trying to say. And I know, you know, like you get Cuba, after 50 years or more of the revolution, you have an elite, highly educated, highly capable, and many of them very Western in their values, aesthetics, orientations, and modes of life. And they become, in a sense, the carriers, the carriers of the values of the American social system. So what they see from their class vantage point is technology, iPhones, large screen televisions, automobiles, travel, hotels, which elites similar to them in the United States or other Western countries can avail themselves of. So in return for becoming this new elite, this new bureaucratic managerial elite, they take in the ideas of white supremacy. Now, probably the threat of racism and racial prejudice in Cuba is greater now than it was at the time of the revolution, precisely because you now have a class that looks more to the United States and elites that are something like them than they do to the Cuban masses. Okay? Now, does that translate into a white supremacist state, a white supremacist social system? I don't think so. But can it evolve into that? Who knows? But it does. This group that looks to the West constitutes potentially a counter-revolutionary destabilizing force within their societies, because they look outside rather than to their own people. And when they look outside, they look to the West. But what is the West? The West is just another way of saying white. And saying white is just another way of saying investment in whiteness and ultimately a white supremacist social system. That's where I would.
Let me ask you one question. Would you apply that to Soviet Union?
Well, that's what destabilized them. It was not the failure of socialism, it was a failure ideologically to deal with this new elite, which was constrained by a number of things, including the level of development and a certain mythology that they had about the West. So rather than seeing themselves as part of the Soviet working class or the Russian working class, they saw themselves as having more in common with white Westerners, with the emphasis upon white, than they did with their own people. And I would dare say when Meghna talks about India, I'm certain Johan and Samir could talk about Pakistan. We see it in South Africa, where a white supremacist system was never overturned. Certain laws were changed, but what do you have? You still have the privileging of white people and those nearest to whiteness.
Thank you, Doc. Anybody else? Last chance. Oh, Stormy, yes, please.
I think something that's like so surprising when you come here, and one of the best things about this is how intergenerational this space is. So anyone can answer. Sorry. I was just saying how great it is, how intergenerational this space is. So I was wondering, anyone can answer on the panel, what role do you think young people play in this movement, and like how can we utilize our power?
Okay, what a question. I think as young people, we have to start with the idea that we're not like born out of our wombs or revolutionary, and we don't know everything, even though we think we do. I think that's just like an age-old thing about being young, is that we think we know a lot. But when we just hear about the history and the experience of people who've actually lived through this, who've lived life, who've been through everything. I think we have to go there to give ourselves the courage that we can keep going. Like, we're doing this worker center in Upper Darby, and sometimes 2 people come. Sometimes nobody comes. Sometimes 1 person comes, but it'll be the same person who's really awesome. And we went to Yvonne King, who had actually started the Chicago free breakfast program, and she said, "You young people, you think that everything's gonna happen in a day or in 2 months or in 3 months. No, it's gonna take at least 6 months for the community to come, but keep doing what you're doing. If you hadn't made all these mistakes, then you wouldn't have learned what you know now." So I think young people with elders who have lived through revolutionary times, I think we're a really unstoppable force, but we can't do it separately or in silos. I think we have to go back to the wisdom of the elder generation so we can, I think Derek said it before, he said we have to keep the torch. We're keeping the torch lit, and now we're giving it to you, so.
Just to answer that, on that, from my own experience too, I think, like Meghna's saying, it's more learn your history, but I don't mean that in like the way that we mean it as young people now, where it's just like know your history. It's more, get to talking with the older generation on what they know, and I think that helps us. It's just like reading, it's listening to them and understanding the context and where they're coming from and how that's different from our times now, but also in the same way, how that same pattern kind of evolves, helps us as young people see the pattern, see white supremacy and whiteness, how it's manifesting. Yes, it manifested in Doc's time a different way, it manifested in a different, in a variety of different ways, but we're young people now, and times have changed, the economic situations have changed, the socialness has changed, and we're the only ones who know how it necessarily operates. The older generation doesn't necessarily. It's the same way that when the next generation comes, we won't understand, how they work, but it's learning it's learning what they know, learning the context in which they learned that, and then reapplying that to understand where we are, how we're gonna keep moving forward. So the mistakes that they made, we learn not to make them, and they also learn from us like what they couldn't learn at their time due to whatever, whatever oppressive, wave was happening at that point, whether it was sexual identity, whether it was gender identity, whether it was, entrepreneurship and all that type of stuff. How are we changing the way that we learn as young people and utilizing our time, but also, just respecting that they know way more than us, like Megna said. At some point.
I just want to add one thing, which is that I think the youth have the energy to take the work forward, and I think that should not be undermined. Is that the youth is the future, and we do have to learn from people, but in some ways we have to find our own way forward too. I remember at the Cuba conference, the ambassador who had come, somebody asked him a question about, I don't know, it was something specific. It was like, how did you solve this problem? And so forth. And he was like, well, we did it like this, but you have to find your own way. So yes, we have to learn, but we also have to rely on ourselves.
I know that Elliot said we know it all. I don't. We know a lot. More than that. Well, I just want to tell you about an event that the Black-Brown Coalition gave last week, where Pam Africa was the principal speaker, and Mumi Abdul-Jamal recorded, a statement which was very beautiful, and Pam spoke brilliantly. Student organizing today is more difficult than it's ever been. I was impressed, and I talked about it to some people, that there was not a single Temple professor there, and only one adjunct, Divya. And so you're confronted with senior professors that you take classes with who don't support you, either in your ideological development or in your efforts to make the university better or to make the world better. So you're fighting against such odds, and then you have this mass of students who come here for one thing, come to Temple for one thing, to party, and to be frivolous. And the event that you all put on was something the likes of which I've never seen. The level of ideological development, the level of organization, the level of unity. So I think that we're on the cusp of a new vanguard of the people coming from these struggles. And if, as I believe, we are facing a new system breakdown, a collapse, an unraveling, I think that you all are very well positioned to give leadership to a long struggle where the most important, I think, component of the struggle will be the fight for ideological clarity, to clarify for the people what you all are doing. So it's quite amazing, like I'm an OG, and I have to say to Nandika, that does not mean older generation, original gangster. But it's quite extraordinary, I mean, to hear the way you all theorize, the practice that you enter in. Can I just tell one story about him? All last summer, he devoted himself to reading the biographies and memoirs of leading members of the Black Panther Party. He does George Jackson, Huey Newton, Elaine Brown, Assata Shakur. He read, and I read all these books, I figured I knew, because I was down with them back in the days. But he read all of these in order to understand that moment and apply the lessons and avoid the mistakes of that time.
I just want to say one more thing. My comrades and I, we've given up our Friday nights so we can wake up and come to the free school. Not all the time. Well, yeah, and in our guidelines for our internal guidelines for our organizing, we made coming to the free school mandatory. So I just mean entering into that kind of discipline, which members of the free school have been doing for years, and who are so disciplined. We have to learn from that and commit ourselves to that, because without that, we can't develop ourselves in the way we need to confront the forces that are against us. So even if it means no more parties Friday nights, I think it's okay. Yeah, we have Saturday.
Okay, concludes. Okay, and with that, we're done. This part. Unless someone has one more thing. You can say it. Yeah, totally. Please.
There. What's your name?
Magna?
Magna.
Magna. Okay. Did you say you're doing some type of work in Upper Darby?
Yes.
What type of work are you doing, and who are you doing it with?
So we're doing it with the South Asian. Right now we're rooted in the South Asian community, but it's open to everybody, and it's a worker center. So we have so we had been door knocking in the community for 10 months to find out what people's issues were, and the issues that we heard the most were that people needed legal help because of immigration issues, and also they needed help with people didn't have health care. So we have every second and fourth Sunday we have a worker center, and the second Sunday we have a legal clinic. So we have a lawyer who comes in from 4:30 to 7 to provide free legal advice, and then from the fourth Sunday we have a nurse and someone who can help navigate healthcare. But we are also trying to incorporate political education into that, and once we build relationships of trust with people, we want to raise people's consciousness and do the kind of work that the Black Panther Party was doing, and get people to confront their contradictions. And
The reason I ask this is because I just came from there. I lived in Upper Darby for a while, and the neighborhood was changing.
Yeah.
And now it's very multi-ethnic.
Yeah.
An awful lot of African people
Yeah.
also have moved in there. And I was wondering how many of the Africans are affiliated with your group and working alongside of you? Or how many African Americans are in your group working alongside of you that are knocking on doors, so that everybody is represented, so that when you knock on doors, they not only see you, but they also see, because a lot of people, when I moved there, a lot of people from Southwest Philly and West Philly were moving into Upper Darby.
Yeah.
And white people were moving into Center City to the condos.
Right.
So now that has happened, I'm just wondering how multi-ethnic are you in terms of including African Americans in there to work alongside you, because they also have issues too. You also have a Marc Davidson, who's a state representative up there in the Barclay area.
Yeah.
That's also involved, and she's some type of activist, or I don't know if it's all political, but I don't know if you're attached to her or not, and about what she's doing there.
Right. Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. I guess we started with the South Asian community because that's where we're from, that's our civilization, but organically through the work, people from the African American community are also coming to the worker center. We have a Haitian immigrant who's also started coming recently, and we hope to build, but we hope it's an organic process. Do you want to say something?
I wanted to say that the South Asian community itself is very complicated, and they do, the communities we come from do harbor anti-Black racism. And, people have contradictions.
Because a lot of Asian people have moved into and started businesses there, and they're not very friendly towards African Americans, as you well know. That's
Absolutely, right.
That's all over, and I'm just wondering, how you're doing all this work, this outreach.
Exactly.
Are you working together to represent some kind of united front?
Mm-hmm.
So it won't, at least you can represent unity between the Asians and the Africans.
Absolutely.
Or Africans Americans.
Right.
That's an idea.
Well, this is something we want to address through our work, because I think to address contradictions within people, you have to win their trust first, and we're trying to win the trust of our community because we don't live there. To them we're also in some ways outsiders. So we're going there consistently. People know us. People recognize us now, and through these conversations, we want to start talking about how we as South Asians relate to the Black community.
I mean, that's like at the forefront of what we're
You
thinking.
know that we're consumers. You might not like us, but we definitely buy from you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
if you could just ease that a little bit, you know. And also Margaret Davidson, she's African American and she's been re-elected and she does a lot of activism in that area. So I was just wondering there was some connection that you all had, or you're just interested in your own specific group, ethnic group.
Well, we don't, I don't think we've met her, have we?
She's in the Barclay Center
Okay.
there. Shopping center on Garrett Road. It's further down from Market, but
Alright.
it's not hard to get to. It's
Okay.
right off of 69th Street.
We should talk afterwards, yeah.
And that concludes our panel.
Okay, so we'll go straight to the next panel, which is on internationalism and intercivilizational unity. Can the panelists please come up? That's Jahan, Susan, Brandon. Who's the person I'm missing?